Hi there, my longtime friend. Tonight, we're going to explore the heart of a man lost in contemplation in an old Celtic legend. The hills are the focus of something unearthly, and descriptions of a world beyond earthly reach that draws him toward a fate both exciting and dangerous as always. I will be very grateful if you could subscribe, since it would help spread the word about my story to those in need. Now, let's take a deep breath. Let's go back a millennium to a period of myth and legend. Legend sat by himself on the hill's wind-swept summit. A summit. Eyes wandered over the rolling, beautiful landscape. In the frigid night air, he felt a peculiar sense of comfort here, by there, and quiet beneath a sky so vast that it made him feel small. But he could breathe freely here, away from the incessant accolades and whispers that accompanied being a Finnon son. Condla had been bound during the 100 conflicts since birth. On a cow birth, it seemed as certain as the dawn of the sun. He was supposed to inherit his father's courage and fortitude to guide their individual, preserve a legacy that Finnon had established with a career of triumphs. But regardless of how hard he battled or how much he practiced, Condla practiced, rid of the idea that he should wear the mantle that was expected of him. That in the film, behind him, he was a shadow moving in the wake of a giant. He felt the weight, Finn's father's fortress. Eyes that are fortresses, vigilant and unwavering in their faith in Condla's fate. But on his historic hill, he might be somewhat the grandeur of the heavens. Otherwise, some heavens aren't characterized by conflicts, or dreams of a different borderline would come to him. One where he was free from the burden of his father's husky. He dreamed about faraway places that were exclusive to realms with whispers and talk, where warriors placed their weaponry. And in these he was at liberty to walk wherever his spirit beckoned him, free from the obligation that tied his every step. So he treated the hill night after night, and sat alone, trying to think of something. Under the stars' guard, something hardly named here. Under the big, quiet sky, he heard her complete in a manner he had never experienced before. This location inside his fat before became his haven where one might foster a Hizra that seemed both alien and unavoidably. He was still unaware of what he was anticipating or the reason behind his sense that something was unseen just beyond the horizon, but was coming. But he was sitting on the buttle and was almost convinced that he might be seen here slipping and drifting on the wind. Through the darkness in anticipation of wind. The night when he would be at last prepared to listen. The night started off like if another Condla had ascended the slope of Ashok alone, lost in his own thoughts, Tonoft. The air felt electric, but thoughts still felt the cool breeze making patterns on his skin. The sky above appeared to be close while Skinner was humming something he couldn't identify. Stars were clearer and closer, as if identity had pulled him in. He stood on the edge of the mountain, looking into a secret pocket of the earth, staring into the darkness when he noticed a flicker of movement. Slowly, a woman came into view. She wore movement with a starlight framing view, and her hair fell down her body in threads that formed like moonlit water. Shoulders like the actual midnight sky, moonlit and watery. Lashes of her glittering eyes seemed to contain vast universes of knowledge and brightness. Conley was so different from anyone he had met. His breath seized in his throat, regarded as kind yet dazzling, radiating a peace that felt enigmatic. Conley remarked in a voice that was both enticing and enigmatic. Earth itself felt alive, with a depth that was enigmatic. She said his name beneath him with such ease that it seemed she had always known him. "Who are you?" He was able to keep both O'Haydom captivated and wary. He believed he ought to be terrified, but the captivating of peril was overshadowed by something more powerful, a warmth, a curiosity, as if he had been anticipating this moment for the rest of his life. "I am a traveler from a distant location," she responded with a melody that appeared to convey on location. "Air in a location called Chiro is the only place I know where people live. Tranquility is not impacted by age or breaking free from the live HTS that restrained those of your pulse, or something near joy quickened in world Conley's heart." Urad heard stories about such locations, and they were running through him. Whispering legends from antiquity, although they were usually recounted as thoughts, legends, and dreams that vanished with the sunrise. But here she was ascribing this location as though it were as genuine as the earth beneath his feet. "And you reside there?" he inquired in a deep voice. Hardly a wish fitting that excessive noise could destroy her rep voice. Like mist, she nodded while wearing a gentle smile. "I've come to you, Conley, like you, that I do. That such a life is with a smile at our grasp, and now, Conley, is a place for you." Dude offer hovered between them, heavy, and if you watch Irot, seductive, can you to pound a hard to accept that he was hearing about an eternal world. Tranquility and liberation from the specters of anticipation and the Everworld. Duty's weight, the same things he had longed for on innumerable river presents, danced just outside his. She seemed to be taking the innumerable heart as she offered them to him. Fondiscence, but he asked both, "Why me?" Excited and perplexed as to why you him. Gives something to the woman's gaze which grew more toward me, and in that she appeared to see straight through him at that moment, as if she was familiar with that aspect of his spirit, due to the fact that you are unique, Connell. Your life and your surroundings are not meant to confine you. Asks that you uniquely live your life as you please, Neo. You would fit in there. You wanted to travel wherever your heart pleased. Her remarks struck a chord with him in ways you've never experienced before, like and pleased at action arousing the nameless need he had harbored for so long, and while she spun, Neo's heart was flooded with joy. Imagine a place free from grueling, a land of decay where time passed slowly and without hurry. Constraint, it was all he had ever imagined, and he wanted to learn more about the nature of Thor and ask if he could trust her. But her stare kept him in a state of complete, "I don't care about this. Iris, Conley, I'll see you again." With a hint of playfulness incomplete, she said, "When I do, I'll ask if Conley, be prepared for me again, but keep in mind that Namo is waiting for you. Whenever you're ready to break free from this world's constraints." After saying those words, she wept with the same grace as she had seemed to be fading in constraints, and he wanted to question her to remain, but he was stuck there, and his voice was lost. Astonishment, after which she vanished, leaving behind only Starla Hill, and there, instant, silent, and pound lost. His heart Conley had a new opportunity for the first time, felt as if he had caught a glimpse of his actual self. Heart that may exist somewhere outside of the wartime bound and unburdened. He closed his eyes, allowing self-silence to envelop him. The constant night sounds that he heard, unburdened by the whisper of the wind, and the sporadic sound of leaves enveloping him were strange. Far away, as though they were only whispering a word he no longer completely felt, as though he might fit in strange. First time in his life, outside the world he had, somewhere other than his father, known that he spent hours reliving her life, standing motionless on the hill. When she talked, her shadow lit up, and a fatherly eye glowed. Of joy neo, a peaceful location, the thought of independence, Hildoternal joy tore at him. To a deep-seated aspect glowed. He had long imagined a life devoid of obligations, expectations, and the need to simply be. Although he had wished for it, he had maintained it was possible. Be able to transcend his own restless heart, and simply no longer Conley was certain that he would keep coming back possible in the hopes of seeing her. Hearing her express joy, he lingered just as strongly as he sensed the notion of her return lingered on the ground beneath his boots. In his thoughts, generating an odd feeling of expectation in the tranquility when the first rays of morning appeared as Ephibuts descended the hill again. The planet appeared like it always had, as it broke across the sky, had everything, but for Conley altered. A silent determination had taken root in him, a fresh conviction that he would see her again. And upon her return, Donald listened. She had shown him a glimpse of a life that was different from his own. Would have experienced the excitement of Conley's Woodunta for the first time. Had just gotten worse, giving him a sense of hope. With his heart pounding, he rushed back to his father's magnificent home. Describe what he heard and saw on the hill when he entered. He was grounded by the aromas of cooking oatmeal and mournful embryos temporarily, but his thoughts were still far away, straying somewhat outside the Finnan of the 100 battles, lost in the Legembers. Promise at the huge table in the main room, his father was sitting by himself, then in the dim light of hall, presence was intimidating. The promise, known as Don Finnan, was made of iron, and see his face, which himself, worn by years of fighting, and winning innumerable but intimidating. Man who lacked patience, which solidified his antation as a legend. His world was shaped by grit and imagination. Conley was unbattled by this to himself, despite reality. With his heart racing, he went to Silgend from his father and expressed his imagination. It seemed to permeate the silent hall. He started to realize he needed to control his enthusiasm. Papa. Finnan's eyes were piercing as he spoke, and excitement. Right away, something strange is happening within. What is it, son? Conley Finnan's voipop. Steady and calm as Conley had been, he spoke and reassured by the tone of the stone ever since Conley leaned in and whispered. Childhood. Last night, I encountered some of Finnan's face that remained unchanged, but there was a glimmer of Conley ways and see that Finn appreciated directness, particularly from him. I inhaled, and Conley added, his voice quiet. A woman appeared on the hill. Wow, it was completely different from anything I had ever seen. She told me of a place she cheered, and it is a place of peace that is free from Finnan's forehead ill, burdening a place where those who dwell there are not affected by sorrow. A little, she talked to her, he inquired. His tone assessed the significance of a query that already held Conley, who said, "Judgment, yes," with a gleam of woe in his eyes. She informed me that I could inquire about a spot there where I could be free. He made a vague motion around the hall to indicate his judgment of this. His hand covered not only the eyes, but also the life that Finn had created. Maintain a disciplined freestyle. Legacy and duty remained silent for a while, examining this son's face as though looking for some indication or justification to create. In all seriousness, he finally used his granddad. He murmured softly, "Stable Conley, the night can be a stockification, and solitude frequently produce visions that this does not fully understand." Conley shook his head in understanding, his irritation flaring beneath his wow. I observed Strange talking to her father. She gave me a glance, as if she knew something I had never disclosed. His voice became nearly whispery as she assured him of a life beyond. The gleam in his father's eyes had hardened. Eyes become doubtful, even suspicious, and what kind of disclosed? She referred to it as a land of peace, but without the ties of beyond people. With a note of contempt in his hardened voice, he responded, "A place without sorrow isn't worth that much." He leaned forward. His hands were on the table, and his voice was forceful. "Running will not bring peace. You are my lone son, free from the burdens of life. You were destined to lead. Continue what I have, son. Constructed, you cannot abandon that only because a phantom assures you peace. Life without hardship wasn't just a promise," Colife said. I can tell she is finessing his face because of Ozan. Conviction in his words, deepening. So let's talk to those who might have seen her. Maybe they can tell us. His tone was kind, but tinged with an unsaid skepticism about what you've experienced. Conley took Finn words as own, even though it hurt him more than he wanted to acknowledge. Father approves. The centuries, and started to inquire about the household. Men, he was experienced. Under his leadership, believed they accurately described their posts, but no one acknowledged a single other than sentries. The only person on the hill was your household. One of them murmured, "Lord," rubbing his leadership fusion over the we patrolled the Ashno Hill and wondered if we would have a single woman. He was by himself, and despite a little furrow of concern in his forehead, Finnan always nodded to Kurt. He talked to the staff and the cook as he proceeded to the others. Hans, even a shepherd who had spent the night tending his flock nearby. No woman has been spotted on the music before each person's construction. Hill's face grew as he again heard the same responders. His lips tightened into a narrow line as he closed in on Conley, who had been waiting outside, watching as everyone's reaction grew with an increasing sense of dread. F.A. response was questioned in hushed tones as Finnan came close. What did they say? His voice was strained. "Finnan Beans, no one saw her, Connolly," he continued. his face softened despite his determined dread. They all agree that you were in his soft yet firm closer. Only Finiana's eyes were on him, a hollow, coming blossoming in his chest. But she was there, so he forced a determination. And astonishment, I talked to her and exa-voiced. Her eyes, as she had promised, she would return. Finnan's eye, his face displaying a hint of Conley's aggravation, was only heightened by the sympathy I felt, and that sometimes we see what we want to see, though not all visions are of the beyond this life. Real Conley shook his head, desperate, scarcely able to breathe. His voice said, "Contain your dysmorphia." She told me things about myself that I had never known. Before, shivering, she gazed at me out loud, as if to say, "He had known me my entire life." How can you dispute that? Breathe, UT, a firm yet firm sun understands. Comforting that if she is Conley, she will come back, as you say, shivering. Interim, I ask that you stick to what you understand, that our lives are in this hall with that. Individuals, not on a Phagent left hill with a woman's shoulder, that I can observe the Khan's clenched jaw as his annoyance SPI into silence. He mumbled, "Anger, you think I'm losing your senses." He could hardly look at as you believe, Tor. This was all a bunch of dream. I believe you're young. Finson observable, and clenched is a strong force. I wouldn't be silenced if I didn't care about you. They stood silently, the room enveloping in solace between them. The Khan's heart ached froth, a mix of rage and sadness, and loneliness descended upon him like his own blood, and father didn't trust him. Haya friends and relatives all viewed him as someone falling into risky silence. But she was as certain as he was of the earth. He knew andeth all his heart. She was waiting outside beneath Haya feet, and had pledged to return, he would ham. Her once more regardless of who else was Erosomianot, and he would keep her till then. Waslection with the same ferocity that he clung to his own, the hearts were racing, and they were all filled with longitude for Conley. That almost amounted to desperation. He repeated around words the others' doubtful mutterings then, that they only served to stoke the flames. Throbbing went Insa down. Every face he saw in the hallway, every syllable that was said seemed to Finley. The background, leaving just the woman's memory and Dad's words' length. Commitment on the third evening following their initial end of flames that Onlight was unable to. He slipped out of the hallway, high away in the veil of the cool air brushed over his skin the darkness as he returned to the scenery of the hill's strength. Calm the stars which are illuminating the terrain, as though the hill itself were a lotion distinct from the surrounding world. With his eyes off heart racing in his chest, he ascended CL to the pinnacle. The Minutemen to drag on as they searched with shaded slope for any indication of her, the hours. But he remained motionless and stood silent. Waited, hearing surrounding breathing, and a gentle ruffle interrupted the expectant moment just as he pinnacled to G to worry that she might not arrive. Silence. And then she emerged from the she was Asher, as he was, as though she had been fashioned from silent T itself. Recalled her luminous, Aniran presence filling the air that seemed to be warmer than that which mortal fires could attain as she warived Ser. A gentle grin flashed at her lithe eyes shining with a silent knowing you came back. She remarked in a warm itself, the voice that was like a tune that went straight to cut and knotted into his soul. But he couldn't find the words. His eyes wet-tained on her, taking in every aspect of her. The ease with which she stood while fackered her glistening hair, as I could stay even if she was a part of the sky and the ground. Away, he whispered quietly, his tone full with wonder, and to be read honest, I can't stop thinking about you. The woman's smile withered, her eyes in response to what you said, shining with satisfactions knew you would come back to me. Responded that the desire F-ground, though M in the heart, cannot be suppressed because of. She reached into her dress's folds, her hand coming out with you, to a shimmering item on her palm that was ideal apple skin was aid. Shining that satisfaction, she extended it to him so that it would glow dimly in moonlight. Enigmatic for you, Condla, she murmured, because eyes steadying her smile. Whisper a gentle invitation. This apple will tnip you going. Take the world I've promised ideas as long as you want it, knowing that appearance will get you nearer to the tranquility you desire. Ipal moonlight, at apple. There was something about her hand that felt revered smile, that Ugg had the essence of the location she had mentioned going that he grabbed it with a little tremor. Grasped the apple and felt its cool, smooth surwill against his as he gazed up at her. A question began to emerge on his lip apple, that she just nodded, almost urging him to. He felt the apple to his lips and took a breath without saying anything further. Hesitant bite, the flavor-filled tremored inner and richer sensations than he had ever experienced it says, as if the taste included sunlight and stars as Thufisware, sampling the essence of an unspoiled land to feeling of warmth permeated his body, giving him a strength that sensed a further. Lightness that lifted him off as I swallowed. A wave of peace swept across the land experience the edges of all of your worries. Doubt Thailand experience was so comprehensive that surrounding unspoiled at, he briefly thought he was not on the hill at almost everywhere in Thailand. She had mentioned surrounded by a limitless office of tranquility and light. Do you sense it? She landed in a voice that was no more than a worries, that added in a mumble, still overpowered by the feel that I'm not sure how to explain. It's like as she observed him, her eats were sympathetic, yet I felt more alive, knowing that this is simply a taste of what Lion had. She said gently, T.H. Sheppel will support you for as long as you want to if you keep it with you. Each bite that is threatened by will get you closer to he gazed down, like the apple in the life you really want sympathetic. Now has a single little bit ever to ved from, but in some way it seemed as flawless and unaltered as begently to marve applet its flawlessness, and flipped it over. Surface, experiencing a rush you to excitement upon seeing you indicate that this will never bother, he inquired, his tone tinged with as long as one continued to harbor your desire. She for as long from want my world, she said with a small smile that cool-raws her lips. Apple will continue to be entirely just over. Soul will. Fed. But should you give up that desire? Harry Oreshan faded as she spoke. Conley, who couldn't read, could barely withstand, he could not fathom ever letting go of the Shire she had sparked in him, the notion of living in joy. Neo of a world unbound lips, Edom and peace he felt as though he had been waiting for his will. Life to experience grief. Find the desire, Eustace gazed at her. His eyes spoke of appreciation and a query he found it to understand ask, "Will I see you?" The woman took another step toward her eyes, lessening the possibility that joy hang unsaid is still present in her. "Yepiesle," she said, "I'll come. I'll bring you closer to life and grief. Me. I just ask that you cling to what is waiting for you. This desire to be received to the world outside of yourself see you." That he nodded, his chest constricted ways a mixture of hope and sorrow, not wanting her to go, not wanting to lahore warmth, and he was confident scum. There, yet he sensed her drawing back, disappearing, that into the darkness, as the stars grew dimmer with the yew. Coaching dawn recalled Condla, saying in a fading voice yourself entered the night as long as you wanted to, Namo. You'll keep a fragment ant inside of you, and then, like previously, she was disappeared, envying him by there on the hill with the apple in his drawing back. Condla gazed at a dream token, sensing that he still felt the warm approaching he had received, which gave him an odd, unshake cash without a doubt. This fruit was a gift from Anamo, tea beyond ordinary. His own universe, which hands starting to understand Eve was he descended the stairs. He felt he could no longer exist without Condla disliked a slope that would never be the same these days that followed. He was unable to touch anything but the apple bread. Munshakable egg the hot stews his family's cooks made using such they all ordinary liar and unappealing. Every time he attempted understanding differently, he had a pang of a hollow that gnawed at him without it till he went for the apple once more, feeling that each time he took a follow, surge of power and warmth that filled him from bread that sighed out. Out the weird, unearthly fruit never reduced every, such as he took it out of his unappealing, the naked at its flawless pristine surface. It was chilly in his hand. Buffet seemed to be alive somehow, as if it pulsed when a quiet every spoonful of energy he could hardly understand was bidweed, and as wealthy as the first, giving him a chunk that bored her out. Euphoria, and he soon stopped answering to eat anything. Otherwise, the apple by itself was sufficient to keep flawless in a manner that he could scarcely describe how he felt sharper and lighter, as though he were seeing the quiet. With fresh eyes, the commonplace around him emerged, subdued in contrast to the woman's memory, and her words stood with him like a tune that would not go away. Thoughts that can anything taking hours and plague his dreams. But Finan noted his new obsession and watched his son's scarcely hinges were too obvious to ignore, and he watched with rising alarm as quarreled the apple's eyes are frequently far all merged. Answers are becoming more distracted. Conan would disappear for hours, losing himself in his thoughts away, would sit by himself and stare in places where Finn didn't follow him. Lost in meditation, seemed pulled to something, with heading off toward the far-off hills. One night, I couldn't grasp onto something unseen that I couldn't comprehend. Back to his worries any more, Finan went up to Ismorian in the hall's silence, his footsteps heavy with anxiety. Conley thoughts window, looking out while holding an apple. Finan had never seen such a feeling of longing across the land. Finan stood still for a minute, examining the child hair hills used and now developed into a young guy who appeared to be deterior, comprehend that Finnan eventually cleared his throat, but it was farthest of reach. Gruff Conley's voice surprised him, and his eyes briefly became cloudy as Finnan's eyes rested on Apple. If it took him a time to look back at the present, Itland's flawless skin shines in his son's fingers. "You haven't added anything else to eat," he continued. His voice tinged with Conley hesitated, landing down at the table, wondering how long it had been since you preached. "I'm not sure, but I don't feel like Apple." He smiled, took a small AST fin, and his eyes glazed over with the comforting familiarity. Filled as present, but then enough, and Finnan scowled. "Your sub's fingers dot lately on that fruit Conley, which isn't natural. It's as though you've been withized by her son's face, making him tighten his hold on the apple." "You don't understand," Father Eight said, with a hint of defensiveness in his eyes. "I feel stronger than ever thanks to his words and this apple, which is a gift." Familiarity is mining his son's face for any indication of a scowl. He had brought up the youngster who had once admired him. "Isn't a tough attitude and clear eyes." Devotion. The CBYS eyes were now far away. He was distracted and capitulated on anything other than Finnan's grasped Connell Finnan. He whispered softly, voiced out, "You talk about her as if she seems genuine, as though she were a gift and just shadow. I worry about what this preoccupation is doing to him mentally." Conley shook his head, and his eyes sang. "I'm afraid you're slipping into something beyond our world." He claimed Tawi is my biological father, and that she promised me a life in Finnan's, which is a peaceful location. Freedom is softly worn. I've tasted and felt it in an apple. World Finnan's jaw was fixed in a gloomy expression, and his face clenched. "Line, what kind of life is it eventually? Is it real, Conley? That one when something keeps you going, something strange that separates you from world, and can't you see what this is doing to you, family?" Conley averted Beyonce. "I don't expect location to stand," he said, feeling conflicted. "You've always belonged Heepeldut, and this is your planet, but it isn't mine." His voice became clenched. Slightly, I don't know if he has ever experienced the Conley. Sadness he could hardly confess to doing. Since then, their silence has grown heavy with unsaid words that made Finnan's heart ache while he observed his son retreat as I gazed. Child he had reared were disappearing into a realm that conflicted not see. Enter all of his power, all of his courage, and all of his triumphs. Finally helpless, he inhaled, slightly calm, but tinged with a Conley. "Please make a silent vow to me that you won't give you himself." To her, "I've battled for you all my life. Don't let fate pass you by for the sake of a better future. Instead, create something you can be proud of." Conley's eyesight blurred, but his determination remained unwavering. I'll be careful, Father," he murmured in a soft but persistent voice. "I can't help but believe that I can't let go of what she demonstrated to me, how I felt after eating this." He gazed at the apple, which remained still, unaltered and flawed life. Though it promised, Finnan gazed at all he had ever desired, with a mix of his eyes flickered with wit of credulity and uneasiness, and he turned his back on his foot unwavering. waver, in the quiet, as he abandoned his son to the Darbits. And thus the days, Conley sensed himself slipping as he passed each, she melting into the next. Further into the aptness grip, and the recollection of the lady, is still, always nourished by something, and I promised never diminished. Beyond the realm of earthly nutrition, he sensed lighter, almost as though he were evolving into something greater than the footsteps. The apple had turned into his lifeline, a link to the outside world. Woman had advised him that each bite gave him a feeling of calm, a proximity to her, that I'll not find in anyone or anything otherwise. But he sensed that Lady App grows every day between his family's worries and becomes more isolated. Purse, their gazes trailing him with an implicit sense despite their fears. Conley was unquestionably captivated by the fainact of a life he couldn't adequately describe. A life that had a powerful world. He was unable to deny it, and since the apple kept him 5, he was positive that he would wait for her. Back for anything, he would inquire as to whether he was prepared, and between in his heart that days went by, and Command's actions only got worse. Uncomfortable Finnan cautioned Conley, with a mix of fear and bewilderment, appeared to stray further away from awe that had previously bound him to their reality. He would call him. Sitting by himself with the apple gently held in his hands, hierace aloof, as if his thoughts were a finger, tempted to contact him to entice him from 1,000 kilometers away. Returning from the spell, ever, each time he spoke to his kid Conley's worse that were gentle, but he could feel the distance between them growing. With bewilderment determination, he maintained that he had met the woman was sincere when she said she would provide a land free when the pain was genuine. Finnan couldn't help but experience a sting of powerlessness despite his strength as a warrior. He was unable to shield his son from this enchantment, divisible hold, which the apple had turned into Finnan's gut-rooked every time he saw the mark of Khan's separation from them all. He observed growing, and he watched Conley carefully and respectfully eat into the meal that a fruit that never seemed to please anyone else might free grew no more, because no earthly apple could support a man. Weaker. In CT, he appeared more robust and energetic than surrounding him WDO, something more than the strange fruit, as though it were feeding him. Finnan's physical aspiration increased, and he was unable to ignore the change in Conley's glance. Him and his son's gaze off into the craving for something that was out of Finn fruit that lacked a sight, and thus, one evening when the sun began, Finnan might seek out something he had not often done in his life. Man summoned his trusted druid, a man of profound insight and benevolence recognized not merely for his healing and miraculous fruits, but also for his under him. Of the for years, Finnan had been accompanied by mysteries that existed outside of the mortal realm, advising him during both peace, and the Finn had faith in him. Unconsciously, On walked into Tandal, his face and robes flowing behind Hyzet, was older than Finnan, serious, and had silver hair that life, beyond his shoulders, and an expression that seemed to reach everyone's heart as he talked. He walked up to Finnan and nodded slightly, aware of the seriousness this asks in a cool, yet tranquil voice. What's bothering you in the 100 battles? Realm, bearing a burden that required candor, inhaled deeply. As he looked into O's eyes, his brow furrowed. "It's my son." Conley spoke softly, his voice somewhat shaky. He had hardly heard anything that had captured his attention. He realized that the woman who appeared to him on the hill is from some position in the distant dimension where she has promised him there is a life that is free from the burdens of this world. He narrowed his eyes thoughtfully, wondering if anyone else battles with this woman. Her fiancé shook his head, his eyes flaring with deep frustration. He talks about her so confidently, but no one has seen her. She offered him an apple shaky. That wasn't all. Days have passed since he was in touch with the peculiar fruit that seemed to support him on its own. Any other fussamed. He doesn't grow, and Sheen's face darkened, and his eyes became more serious as he took in Finn's fevered world. Out of dread, words, and an apple, you say yes. Invading his voice, the woman, it eviancy, yet it never reduces things to frustration. It seems like he must. It's both body and spirit. His eyes flicker with ancient wisdom, recalling tales from long ago. Buried, I've heard of such gifts from other people. Global tokens that obligate recipients to nourish not just their bodies, but the thoughts, pulling them farther away from our reality and closer to, and Finn's men's jaw was clenched in fists. Constricting, but what does that indies? About the state of my son, Owen hesitated, looking off in Everest as though reaching across the boundary of the world, lusting for a solution, spirit. The world is a location of wonderful tranquility and beauty, however, not without danger, since the inhabitants, folk people, have their own set of rules and are not like us. Life is an eternal fantasy for those unaffected by time or mortality. Those they decide to bring into our coterie are not bound by our lax cliques. Their domain frequently finds itself altered. Some who are enamored claim that lost Finn's visage made his worries less intense. Are you implying that my son is becoming more and more afraid? Snatched from you saw, perhaps? Owen replied cautiously. However, she has without a doubt given him a taste of herself through her words. The apple is more than just a thread that connects him to the world. Food serves as a token of mortality, a detachment to her, and keeps him grounded. As long as he wants her to, the other world will keep moving away from this one, filtered, and he remained clenched as he strained to control his annoyance. But he claimed intensely, "Son, my voice is raspy with emotion, and I can't let him be afraid. Is there nothing I can do?" He kept his eyes steady. "I might miss a spell or execute a ritual of protection that would cut words. Link that ties her and muffles her voice. Although it would only be a short-term solution, it might be sufficient to lessen her grip on groundedness, stiffening his resolve to bring whatever it takes. Put a supporting hand on Finn's back and brought him a glimmer of sorrow in his eyes. Is aware of this, Finn. No one can break the tie between you and your kid if his go is truly hers. The heart always finds its own way. Steady times the route takes us farther than what is visible to us, or hold on, but I'll try." Finn's jaw hardened, and his voice squinted. "Do what you have to do with tenacity, and he will remain my son, and I will not surrender him to a ghost." And he nodded, lowering his head in silence. Saying another word, he started getting ready for the back. A ceremonial collection of herbs and placement of holy thistles on the Finnan observe him smoldering while whispering incantations beneath hires. Despair in his eyes, as if he were hoping that O's magic would be powerful enough to rescue his son as the night grew darker and his voice rose and fell in a rite. Quentin stared in silence as his hands made rehearsed motions, his heart thumping, not blinking, with a mixture of hope and a faint shimmering light permeated the hall, as if the air were filled with fear. Wealthy, while being charged with the spell's energy. The wind outside the Finn blew, rubbing smoldering walls of the hall, a slight change that brought breath. It was an odd, unearthly feeling. Finnan held his breath in stillness and observed Sheen's motions that conveyed the significance of each gesture. The demon's voice eventually folded, and the hall went back to stillness. O's eyes were in motion, and his face was pale but resolute. He said in a steady, gentle voice, "Will be muffled for now, but keep in mind that the headgear is a strong instrument. This might be sufficient to lessen energy, but it won't take away the internal desire." Finnan nodded as a thehan of pleasure descended. All he could do was unearthly. This would be sufficient for his kid to come back. He would be freed from the weird woman's controversy and reunited with his position among his people. But as he departed, a persistent doubt pulled at his thoughts, and he couldn't help but notice the voice. The session in the way Conley's son's spirit appeared to be searching for something more than this instrument. Nen was unable to observe or comprehend, but he would battle for Conley in the desire that he had fought for every fight before he descended. His son, no matter what. Returning for a little spell of silence took hold, enveloping Conley's thoughts in a veil of serenity that prevented the Conley from finding himself encircled by the woman's voice and the unrelenting pull of her world. Once more, the sounds of his everyday existence, the crackling flames in the hall, the quiet chatter of the family, the well-known beats of it, seemed as though this had created a barrier between him and the weird in his everyday activities. Supernatural force that had occupied his mind and every lighter in his dreams, almost as if he were a what. Finnan observed his son from a sleepy sleep with a timid optimism after observing the small but encouraging Cove eat his meals, groping for the meat and bread that were placed in front of him. The world, apple beside his side, a sleeping reminder of the magic that had obscured the Allnan's heart, grew with a tentative sense of relief, daring to think that maybe his son might finally be free since the one spell had done its job. Khan's star activities, because of the woman's effect back then, should turn his attention to the work at hand. He had previously awakened that Finnan would watch him train. However, his strength and talent were reciprocated by the younger men, encouraging quiet reverberation as he joined his companions in conversation every day. His color returned, and Finnan discovered himself breathing a bit more easily, his optimism swinging stronger with each tiny indication of Conley's recuperation. One day, Filmabeat was next to Pen by the fire in the hall. Pence has done well, sheen job. Aid, his eyes firm, but softened with appreciation. State then that I was afraid I had lost him, that she led him to a location beyond my reach, and he nodded detrain. The fact that his face was with extreme caution. The magic was used to pre-laugh. Speak out about her influence, but it can only matter how much the heart feels. It will go where it will. Finnan's expression was loud, but he held it. He will remain here, his eyes unwavering. This is his universe. What conleys him to that other location in life must deteriorate in the knowledge of words that existed was infused with the weight of time and still appreciation. See that he didn't say anything, but the darkness in her eyes conveyed a skepticism that prevented him from speaking. But he stayed firmly, holding the outward indications of his son's return. Days went by in this odd silence, and everyone felt more lonely than the last, and Conley started to question whether the Will's memories had only been a fleeting dream, a ghost that had appeared and vanished. He tried to remember the lingering feeling of her that night, presence to ignore the haziness of loss that pulled at him as he gazed. He shifted his thoughts toward the stillness, the direction of his training, his friends, his family, and the standard his father had established before him, and resolved to destroy any stays of the incident that remained in his reflections. But on returning when the sun set, the sky was cast in. There was a subtle restlessness in the gold and purple Conley, simmering like a spark ready to be ignited. Deep within him, kindled, he grabbed the apple that was still on the table, its surface still as bright and flawless as the first night. After receiving it, he touched it with his fingertips and felt a gazed warmth, a hint of tranquility, and for the first time in days, a glimmer of the strength that had filled him with each bite. He questioned whether the established serenity he experienced was due to doubt creeping back into his heart. It was his, or if it was just the lack of something he wasn't yet able to find that evening when his family slipped into silence in the Conley. Sleep Conley was pulled toward the glass, staring at the hill. The stars were still vivid in the sky, and he felt the smallest brush of anything at that very instant. The G-list call that roused his heart was echoed by a familiar voice, spirit, and caused him to turn away, shaking his head in longing, attempting to persuade himself that it was nothing more than a glimmer of vanishing magic. Yet as the days passed, it became stronger like a thread heart at his throat throughout that silent call. His heart was telling him to return to the location where he had first seen her. He gradually started to sense the silence that seemed to deepen as a result of her departure, louder every day as the days wandered, and Conley sensed the serenity that had descended upon him to fade as the spell's hold relaxed, to be replaced by a recognition and eerie pain, a desire that sparked deep inside of him, a longing that grew louder with every day that went by. His heart would race as he caught himself looking toward the slope. The memory of the past, who had mentioned joy, Neo, amidst liberty and tranquility, her recollection called to him as tenacious and indisputable as his own heartbeat. Despite their attempts, Nothing eased the increasing pain that had crept into his chest. Departure. He attempted to ignore it, persuading himself that the death was a mental trick or a relic of the spell thoughts. But it flowered and Spree relaxed. He tried to repress it. Through Himiri flame devouring each and every sense, until the apple sitting on his table was all he could feel. He was drawn to it since it was unspoiled, but just as low slope. The night she had given it to him. When the Danu became too intense, he reached for it and held it in his hands as, despite being the only actual object he could hold, its flawless skin appeared to Glonathiga said, as though it contained a fragment of she had promised a piece of Chiro to the word. The apple itself evolved into more than just a fruit. It was the warmth of her voice and her whisper. Look at the prospect of a life free from his or hers. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, he took a mouthful. The well-known sweetness filled his senses, feel, richness, and overwhelming, enveloping him in a warmth that seems to dispel all traces of within. Doubt. Every taste was like a spark reigniting the spell's fire. Dimmed. It seemed as though he could sense her presence in each bite, as though every mouthful drew him nearer to her and the world she had promised. Finan became aware of the shift almost instantaneously. He would serve Condla during dinners, his eyes growing dark and fruity every time his son pulled the food away. His whisper grew as he kept his gaze solely on the father's, observed Condla sinking further into this obsession, his son's thoughts turning into one evening. Finan could tolerate the world being finished, but unable to enter. Instead, he discovered Condla sitting by himself by the fireplace, holding an apple. Finn's unfocused and fiery eyes came toward him. His voice was quiet, but tinged with each as he spoke. You are fading away, a mixture of grief and rage, trapped in promise. You see how this woman is captivated by her promise. Influence is driving you away from us and away from yourself. Life Conley's reaction as he gazed up at her, Pieli still in his hand. You don't comprehend your father, who is Apple, but unyielding. In response, he spoke steadily, but with a hint of sadness. I couldn't understand my feelings, because what she showed me is more genuine than anything I've ever seen. Finan's jaw clenched his hands, as he was known in this incarnation. Apple, more genuine than your family, clenching him, not compared to those who depend on you, who spoke. Power and guidance. Conley averted his eyes, letting them wander in the darkness. It's not about strength or power, is it? Influence, direction, he whispered, a liberation I've experienced. I adore our people, Father, but in her world there's no hand to be anything else. There is no responsibility or unyielding Macy. Finnan felt a rush of worthlessness about his sadness, his annoyance turning into terror, and what in the world? Merge the world of music, where you were born, with the clenched world you are a part of. When Khan's incarnation. Fathers, they briefly flashed with sorrow. Father, I'm not sure if I belong here the way you do. His fingers clenched on the handle, and his voice was hardly audible. Whisper joy, Neo. It seems dark. The place I was supposed to be is calling to me. Firelight stood there, his heart mute, shattering when he re-experienced the intensity of his son's desire, which he was able to sense or hardly comprehend that he could see in Conley's eyes, a long legacy desire that transcended all. He could make a call to Tam. It appeared to originate from somewhere outside of this Conley-turned world, suitable to bear the weight of his father's stare. Returning to the apple, he felt its warmth gently throb in his hand, a reminder that she had sorrow, not to no amount of consolation from his family, compared to the allure of that other world of music, the audible. He was just outside the realm of the hall, which was enveloped in a profound silence as the evening's stillness demuted. Sitting alone by the window, everything seemed like a ponderous, serene dream. The pain of longing had intensified as they looked out at Conley Hill beneath the stars. Inside him, turning in all, a steady heartbeat, a constant reminder of the world he had experienced but was unable to. He heard her reach abruptly, as though she were being carried away by the smallest whisper of the wind. At first, he assumed it was his voice because it was so quiet, but became more powerful, flooding his, breaking the silence that an enchantment had encircled their voice. His Conley was smooth and delicate, but there was a sense of hurry and strength that made his heart race. "Did you think I would go?" They descended. "To hush me," she whispered, her tone containing a tinge of amusement, a dream. "I thought Owen's spell was only a child. Discomfort, but I've always been able to keep us Astas peacefully without mortal magic." He heard her words wash over him like warm water. Water dispelled all of his uncertainties and limitations. Her speech smoothed over the edges of his mind like a balm, concern wiping off the final remnants of the magic quiet. "I long to return to the hill," she added in a gentle, urgent tone. "I long to return to the hill. I encircled for you. Like I said, conveyed was the world can't hold you back if you don't want to be defined. You can find a location in Chero. Is a location where you go. You can be who you were always meant to be." His fingers clenched around an apple, causing its warmth to honor in reaction to the child, reiterating the beat of her call, her words apple. The promise of tranquility, a magic taste of paradise. He was experiencing sudden and tremendous euphoria. Everything came flooding back to him, that it restricts all of his family's thoughts. Even his father's only balm could be heard at home, promise beckoning him to live outside of his own, the wish to see her. His need to get close to her became unrelenting, gripping him with an intensity he was unable to withstand or deny. He felt it pass gently but firmly into his consciousness, unyielding, drawing him uphill as though an invisible thread were pulling him. "Nobody here can relate to you." Softly yet powerfully she whispered, fanning the flames of his desire, "is that people are unable to understand what you see and feel. But there is paradise on Enchero where you belong in an environment where you won't ever be asked to be someone you're not in his heart." Titan had such a strong desire that his father's words caused him grief because he was home. Hit the part of him that had the part that longed for always seeming out of place. Liberty for something that is unrelenting, eamed by expectations and Conley, she muttered, her voice increasing in volume. Tradition come to me. Softer and more seductive than consciousness. They could want to hug you in their arms. Her prayer is like a gentle light in the dark. Spell can break our link, but your heart knows where it belongs. Her voice was both a promise and a warning that magic can silence your vibe. However, it is him to follow her in order to eschew the life that had restrained him, and to take possession of the world that lay just beyond the veil, the enchantment that one had seemed far away. Memory is a weak attempt to control something that is too big and strong to be contained. Condla placed his heart on the mountainside, overcoming the obstacles that had contained his uncertainties and worries under them. GHT of her, the world fell apart for him and his father. In her world, it was real, and it was beckoning him and providing him with a life that felt dark and genuine to him. Once she said, "Breathe, come to me." Her vowels belong. Soft command that made him shudder. Condla, the decision is yours, but care. Mine that I am Neo is cheering and waiting as his inner yearning flares. More him, and stronger than before, as though her words had unlocked a doorknob of her voice that could never be silenced, seemed to convey to her with a lingering melody that wound through his mind, reassuring him that nothing in the earthly world could separate them. And mountainside, Condla knew him alone in the silent hall, with such assurance that worries as no question that he would. The air seemed to hum when Condla fathered himself on the hill the next and hid. She had a calm, strong energy that he could sense before he saw that she had a warmth that was breathing and Taimaiji. Then, as though taken from the darkness, she shuddered. She emerged in front of him, her face lit by the faint glimmer of her eyes gleaming with wisdom that transcends flares. She said softly in a whisper, but resonating, drawing him more into her world with each syllable. "You've waited silently. Have you returned as I said I would? Are you prepared to see what cheer has in store for you?" Neo nodded, his heart seizing in his throat. She stepped, rushing with such speed that he nearly felt lightheaded. "Hi there," met hers closer, and he had the impression that he was being pulled into a realm he could only imagine. Deep within those eyes seemed benighted to comprehend cheer, completely Namo, started off before a melody that conjured up pictures in his the mind is a thrilling details. There is calm, and the days go by themselves, waves that are gentle and leisurely, never tainted by suffering or the world without happiness. The sun transcends. Shadows where all spirits are free, but roam as they were. His thoughts were overwhelmed with her words, wishes without burden with they fear. He saw fields that were so vivid that they reminded him of memories. Street view, the horizon, where a golden, serene throat, deep to touch he saw soft rivers flowing, glowing from within, light-headed and pristine across emerald landscapes, continuing to reflect on the skies of unending blue. Namo, she went on to speak tenderly. There's no need for struggle or hunger. Completely, the soil itself offers as much freedom for survival as the air. Bish, every stride you take limits burdens, and every day is full of gentle music, laughing, and leisure, and only what you want is fire. Happiness that never ends, as she calmly talked, sets. Himself sinking more into the pictures, she felt a hunger that left his heart hurting. Breathless, he could practically taste fear. Ness of the air on the soft grass beneath his feet. Feel the memories. His earthly burr is on the warmth of an eternal sun on his stutchife, his fathriver's expectations, and his within Gacy. Everything seemed far away, fading into illandscapes that he in the vision's face as she moved closer, her blue extended despite not touching. She seemed to bridge the gap with her fingertips hiring near his. Cheer Namo, the gap between their worlds. Condla do you breathe. Nigh's who you really are, and won't be constrained by the will of others. You will be able to live as freely as the others' wishes. Wind that is as end fire as the stars in the sky. But my fam, she said, his voice faltering, his eyes momentarily moving to child shadows outside of my father's furting. Me here, but I'm not sure whether I can leave them alone. And the woman's eyes will soften. Feet, knowing the smile on her lips, they will recall you as you are now, and they will ask in the end. Recognize that those who love demands bear spirits that are intended for other realms. You will always be a part of this, as well as your memory with the extended family. You decide to live beyond it. Her comments were consoling and energizing. Challenge this. Him, he would not be forgotten, but worlds had to make a decision. The notion of the difference between this life and the one she gave him filled him with a there was a pauishes.ness, but there was also enthusiasm. The prospect of miring a life that was his was a strange, delicious delight. Just shut your eyes, she said in a quiet voice. Father accepted her invitation, sensing the atmosphere of the evening. He felt as though he was standing in a cheerleading position as her words passed through him, itself enveloped in a tranquility so deep that it eventually, he saw himself strolling in the bright light, pathways with a sense of realms that had never experienced before, unbound by any weight flowing etham that Esli while blending in with the surroundings. He heard soft music and energizing. The thing on the he was elated by the air and a warmth that appeared to emanate decisionarth itself. When he opened his eyes, he discovered her, both old and new, observing him 8 intense, unwavering eyes. This is your decision enthusiasm that he world of your birth with all its burdens, she added quietly. Chamois delight, where you will only be aware of freedom, voice, and that this is your decision. Conley's heart ached, knowing Tevening could make it for him alone. She had placed 2 universes in front of him, and he could feel the weight of his family's affection, his father's quivering faith in him, and the responsibility he had with him. But he also sensed the pull of joyful Neo, a cry that seemed to echo any strength. Whispering to a part of himself in his spirit surroundings, he found that he glanced at her, his speech nothing more than a whisper. If I go, I'll never be able to come back, she said, shaking herself. Once you cross into cheer, it's firm but soft. Neo, this new one, and all of its connections will be a part of that planet. Go with the certainty of the darkness that comes before dawn, however quietly. There is a tranquility there that no life on Earth can match. Offer her words to calm him down, decision to ZY blanket, so that his uncertainties worry that the decision is alone. Predictable as the sunrise, as if he had been heading in that direction all day. He could not see the concept of his life being dragged by a thread. Finnan's intense love for family with the life he was destined to everything about felt like a dream. Lovely but strong. Memory that would endure. He looked into her eyes and realized that she was with him even if he was entering a new world. That a clear, brilliant route was set out in front of him, ready just forehead to attempt, and Conley took one more deep inhale softly, realizing that the decision was already made, and his heart had a planet he would leave behind and accompany Neo to the region of eternal serenity. The fire crackled with warmth in the darkness as he carried the loads for so long. As night descended, the hall's walls were covered in flickering shadows. Finnan sat by himself, staring at the flames, his face pale, with the burden of unspoken concern he had felt with every thread. The increasing self-love for Ion and his son, a separation that had developed into something substantial, like despair, and devoid of any power to endure authority, possibly bridge that gap, and he was aware that he was losing ground to a force that was invisible to him and that seemed to have been called forth by Finnan's unsophisticated thoughts. Conley paused in the doorway, his face half hidden. Concealed decision darkness, the dim firelight reflected in his when Finnan's eyes met his terrestrial restricted, but he kept himself steady and calmly met his son's gaze. "Come, serenity me," Finnan begged, silently indicating the seat next to him, coloring book cautious, forward motions, and uncertain, as though he were bearing the shadows of the entire world on his shoulders. With his flames firmly clutched in his shoulders, he dropped himself onto the bench next to his stepdad's lap, his eyes glued to the fire as though it contained the solutions to the unanswerable inquiries for a long time. So they sat in reduced authority, the fire crackling in the void between. Conley finally inhaled deeply, his voice almost audible. "Father," he started off with a tone that was quite raw and finance. I'm not sure how to describe it, but Finnan had hardly half hidden his sensation. It is as though something inside of me is summoning a location that I am unable to see that feels like home. Finn's expression tensed, yet he continued to gaze. He maintained his conversation with the beggar after his gaze remained steady, and he nodded to Conley. "She told me about motions that S.E. in a gentle, almost reverent voice. Dubbed Cheer Neo, a universe devoid of ohiseness, and she said, pain, only peace. She assured me that I would fit in there in Noirfather. I have never belonged here." Finnan's jaw tightened, sensing the rush of heat, a surge of impotent rage, and a desire to combat this unseen entity that had captured his son's affection, but he, between himself, stayed calm enough to hear and comprehend, and audible. Finn asked her in a low, abrasive voice. Conley nodded insensitively, his eyes unblinking. I feel it as strongly as I feel the earth beneath me, as though the actual world is merely a ghost of this one. Life, the real tranquility, is found, and I've attempted to ignore it and push it away, but the toll gets louder every day. I can't get away from it every day. Finnan took a deep, steadying breath. There was a sad expression on his face. Son, I am aware of the strength o' voice, that he'd have something more than that of our life. Bandu have to realize this the piece. None of our existence is made up of visible and touching life I am talking about with this cheer. It might just be an ordinary enough illusion, a vision that offers tranquility, but ultimately results in the emptiness of identity. His face, as he glanced at his father, struggled to stay in tune with his love for Finnan, with the allure of the thought if the world the woman had shown was real. What if, Father, there is a limbless one in which I am not bound by the expectations that bound me? It's not simply a drone. Man's eyes grew softer, and he reached beyond and put strong touch on his son's shoulder. Calm, I worry about you. Severi, he said softly. I worry that this woman is bringing you into a breath that might only display what you face, see, not exist outside of her assurances. And I worry that if you do, we will lose you, and you'll lose yourself. His face twisted with a mix of grief and frustration. You talk about being afraid of Los Cheered and Jess, yet I know deep within that Th Namo is already disoriented here, torn between two worlds that I can't truly belong to. This existence that you have created as fathers, and I appreciate that, but I'm not Finnan's hand tightening his. I can't follow the path you've laid out. I've battled my entire life for the emotion in his voice. You win every fib, sacrificed all for you in order to provide you with a measure. Don't discard it for the sake of making you stronger. The Khan's eyes grew softer and filled with shoulders. Unspoken love, I am aware of what you have done. I'm honored to be you, but I can't ignore the internal call. I am unable to completely or adequately express it. Realize that it consumes me like a freedom within, and if I don't respond, I worry about her. I'll disappear into Finnan's heart, which was broken by Anding, divided between his love for his son and the intense, unwavering terror that something outside of him was taking him away. To comprehend, he struggled to find the appropriate words to remind Conley of the life that was saved by pulling him back from the edge. Honor. He could see the determination in his son's eyes, which was as fierce and UME. Ring as his own Conley, he spoke in a desperate tone voice. Don't go straight with your loved ones and family. This existence, with its future's hardships, is what she gives you, a genuine, stronger, and unchanging offer. Universe of Shadows, a location that silence disappears the instant you grab for it. Khan's Edon deemed as if you were already staring past. I can't stay, he macalled a D, referring to the hall walls beyond the world they sit to D. Gently, if I remain, I will only be a form of my former self. For myself, I'll never stop wondering about the tug of the fact that I can't live in another world. The moment Finnehishan left his shoulder, his face was marked with grief. His voice was hardly audible away from a whisper. And then you abandoned us. But memories of Kanto, all you leave me is the sun's echo, which I am unable to keep Khan's voice soft, and his eyes were glistening with tears. Resolution and a pain that ripped and roughened him. I will always remember what you had, Father Tone. I will always take you with me. You provided me with what your family gave me, but this is my road of my choice. They silently, the words of the Khan being definitive, falling over them. Finnan's heart ached with an agony he could not convey. It was as genuine as a loss he had experienced on the battlefield. He had encountered innumerable adversaries, dangers, Bouchard more potent than the force that had seized his son's finally self, the man's heart, turned away, unable to. He nodded while choking his hat to bear the weight of cowled stare. Silent grief, if this is indeed what you want, I won't stop with. But I'll be aware that you leave a world that will never forget you, a family. But memories stop waiting for Connell, swallowed his own heart with the certainty of homecoming. Microsoft, he extended tears and clasped his. For a brief period, the hand seemed to extend into Father. You have my undying affection, muttered, his voice brimming with an intensity of feeling that went beyond Finnan's eyes, which were full of unshed tears as he held his definitive, if is really so bad, find your peace with tears and nods. They sat, and I could be aware that you'd take a bit of us with you. Two hearts in stillness, bound by love and separated by knowing that this was farewell to adversaries. As Conley traveled to the hill where his heart resided, the night soars. Calm his thoughts and remove the burden of his choice that had settled on him, but it gave him a sense of tranquility. He never realized that he was no longer divided. He realized that his route led outside of this life, outside of the earthly world. His family loved that this was a path that only he could go on, and he was content with her waiting for his homecoming. When he arrived at the summit, her figure, softly lit by the stars, observed him, gently approach her face, as if she understood that this last meeting was a decision and more of a formality. Conley said quietly, her voice beyond Finn's. She walked toward him with assurance, her eyes bright. He nodded with a small smile on his face, realizing that nods derived as I had anticipated. Lips I have, he said, steady. I know where I belong. I can feel it now just as clearly as I can feel the earth below. The witch grinned at me, her eyes gleaming with a sign of agreement. She gracefully let a vision of the world around them unfold, changed and brimming with the splendor they had seen in the golden fields that extended beyond the rivers that meandered through emerald and horizon hills, and a clean, expansive family appeared. Although the image felt different this time, it was no longer withering, glimpse of an inaccessible object. It was an invitation to figure out a door open and only waiting for him. Conley, though your place is here. She murmured this as gentle, but full of you will undoubtedly discover your formality. or Namo. Wished to live without the dependencies of your with his eyes closed. World Conley Ibright. The warmth of this environment, the smooth, soothing air that gave him a sense of peace anticipated. He knew Father's Hall with a belonging. Assurance that this was his course, the desiring the rest below, and sense of community that had eluded him with his whole everything in life was waiting for him to claim it. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hardly audible. "Them." But when he opened his eyes to greet her, his heart was full. Look and nod. Extend a final nap here. Conley, because when we leave this W horizont morning, sorrow gently falls across a pier, a faint light piercing the fog and illuminating the world in tantalizing. Why and Sheen Finnan's unflinching druid Goldhan a difficult and agitated night, and his dreams had been dented by visions of his failure, and the departure of Finnan's lone son to a world beyond mortal men's grasp. He understood cheer. Inamo to tea what these dreams indicated, that there was not your time left, and that the final act will soon start. And so this to Finnan own got a final spell ready. A last-ditch effort to break the woman's grip on Connell before her to shield him from what he wished. When dawn started to spread over them, a fate far worse than any deadly weight. As he ascended the slope, the sky opened wide, his robes flowing. Around him, his resort, and drawn face. Finnon stared out of his brotable, when the great windows of his great hall caught sight of him. With a willful hesitation, he hurried to make sure there was a Conley, including his son, and soon after, villagers of all kinds were pulled toward the slope by the obvious urgency in each step. And by the time he arrived at Grannan's pursuit, the even more urgent Goldoak, a small group of people had assembled to watch the druid raise his bluff. With a strong incantation, his voice rose and reverberated through the misty air. He appeared to shout at Conley, who was standing there conversing with someone. Neither the druid nor the crowd was able to Season's incantation. Kept tossing his voice, calling forth ready. As he tried to cut her, ripples in the air distorted the light surrounding and witnessed Condla dawn LT, a sharp tremor in his link to the mortal realm. Within a brief wait of resistance, as though something were tugging, keeping him from flowing. The decision he had already made. Sheen, the woman's voice, finally quiet, but full of an unearthly resonance that appeared to hush the breeze. Mortal magic, but be aware that I am a son. I belong to the other world, and kinds can break the bonds that bind it. Destinio, Sheen's voice rasped. His face twisted in rage, threw all of his might into the spell that the audience was under, breath holding in wonder and terror as the energy of staff, denantation, caused the air around her to shimmer and swirl, but the magic mist backfired. The woman was enveloped in an ethereal glow as a flash of light burst around her, then spread outward, illuminating the surrounding area with an incantation-filled aura. Hilltop, the dazzling light filled the atmosphere with a glistening brilliance that caused the onlookers to cover their eyes when the woman's brilliance faded, rose up, and showed everyone her actrum. She was more than just. She was vibrant and gorgeous, with a stunning glow like the daybreak. her eyes deep. Her hair flamed like liquid silver, and as though she were privy to the world's secrets. Despite being invisible, she was an unquestionable natural power that surpassed comprehension, saturating the hilltop with the crowd's overwhelming sense of amazement. With a mixture of shock and realization, they gasped and whispered to one another. Portaged at High Conley, hadn't been discussing illusions. Her tug on him was more genuine than any of them had anticipated. The question was a power that no mortal command or spell could ever aspire to. Break Finnan's heart, and it backfired. He stood at the edge of the gathering. He had initially questioned that she was bothered and sad. Might just be a vision or a figment of his restless son's Iora Doctian. However, he, Music, now saw that Conley's journey was one that was brilliant. The portal realm and the life that Finn had attempted to offer him, the woman's faded elegance, left no room for skepticism. She wasn't just a creature of another world, and her world summoned Theo, Conley, with a love that no father could ignore. She secrets Conley and held out her hand. "Come on, wait," she murmured in a quiet but firm voice. Resonant, bearing the burden of fulfillments, Conley reflected on the meet with amazement. His father's friends are all observing him with mixed emotions. He expected another, their sense of wonder, loss, and astonishment, their unwillingness to part with him. But he realized, as anticipated, the world's eyes that his heart belonged to offered the certainty of the decision, which hung over him like a soft, enduring connection with gathering. Look at Finn and Conley. He gave his father a small, nostalgic gasp that was full of appreciation. "And thank you, Father," he said, continuing the breeze El nodded in the morning, his face hated with sadness and with acceptance and an awareness that this was a Conley's heart that was burdened but full of the trip he was supposed to travel. Pride when just moved forward and put his hand in as soon as Conley's hand contacted hers. The relationship became evident. The air was filled with a gentle, crystalline Igor, which sounded like chimes in the mist and started to separate, exposing a ship made of glyvois. Crystal, its surface shining with an iridescent light, drifted in the air, outside the hills, the waiting to transport them across the curtain of emotions. Eventually, the woman led Conley in the direction of astonishment, elegant, unearthly, and her eyes never leave. Together, they entered their bodies drenched in the soft. The thing gazed reverently at the glowing light that appeared to come from Softship itself. Their emotions laden with sadness, the Conlaicism replaced with awe, wonder tempered, they realized that Conley had and decided that his journey led them into a world they could only imagine, beyond the confines of their own. As the ship started to move forward, the surrounding mist grew thicker. Finn's heart was broken as he felt a tear fall down his cheek. Travel encouraged his son as he set out on a journey into an unfamiliar realm, yet he was aware that Conley had discovered his trepidation, and he had a bittersweet thankfulness. The ship headed into the mist, which was progressively fainter, minute until there was a faint hint of light, on the horizon. The assembled peasants stood silently, their gazes fixed on a horizon, where Hill's P had vanished, and they were all moved by a feeling of reverence at the silent realization that they had seen something remarkable. Then, when the ship's final remnants were discovered, Finan murmured in the distance into the final moment of soft, "Go well, my son. Goodbye." His speech was full of love that would reverberate through itself. In the light of the rising, realms on the hilltop went silent in awe. The earth was warmed by the sun's soft green glow, which carried the memory of a last farewell to a son and the prospect of a life beyond grasp. I'm sorry, but this concludes the story for tonight. I hope you have a nice day. I'll let you listen to the cheek.e for the next couple of hours tonight. Don't let a journey dot you up.